The Crusades, a time of death, uncertainty, and extreme turmoil. A never-looming threat of war surrounding the Holy Land. From the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, religious wars would rage on, often at the command of the Latin Church. War for almost 200 years in an effort to reclaim the Holy Land under the eyes of Christianity leadership. A monumentally important time during history, and one of the most recognised images of medieval times. Its impact cannot be understated. Its reach was far and wide, and with any war, there were many victims who suffered the consequences of it. A historical time period which has found itself in various books and other forms of literature over the years, even being adapted for the movie theatre almost as far back as the origination of films. It's a setting which has found itself rarely covered in video games. That is, unless you count Ubisoft's fictional history action-adventure title, Assassin's Creed. A series which has evolved and updated with all the years it's been around, with the vast amount of titles within its library. Originally released in November 2007, 13 years ago, if Assassin's Creed 1 was a human, it'd be a high schooler by now. Nowadays, the true and tried formula of the Assassin's Creed series may very well look like it's overstayed its welcome, with its samey gameplay, slow to change attitude, and rehashed concepts, but at the time, there was nothing quite like it. Desmond Miles, an ex-assassin cum bartender, is kidnapped by a shadowy organisation named Abstergo Industries, the modern-day front for an ancient group, the Order of the Knights Templar, who aim to create the perfect world, through any means necessary. The Animus, a virtual reality machine developed by Abstergo with the intention of displaying a subject's genetic memory in a simulated reality, the subject being Desmond Miles, and the goal being to find out specific information from his medieval ancestor Altair, who was active in the time of the Third Crusade, which in turn would ultimately put them one step closer to their overall goal. While being an interesting concept, nonetheless, the whole modern-day plotline feels tacked on and nothing more than mere padding, keeping you away from the real flavour of the game, forcing you to sit through exposition and walk around an extremely limited space with little to nothing to see or do. The core experience of Assassin's Creed is what takes place within the Animus, controlling Altair on an initial mission to regain status within the Assassin's Brotherhood, before unearthing a greater conspiracy, travelling to various different cities, conducting investigations, and killing targets. A Middle Eastern medieval tale of death, deception, and greed. Assassin's Creed in the then gaming landscape was peculiar with its setting and time period it took place in. Something else rather peculiar to see within a medieval setting was Altair's preferred method of traversal, parkour and free running. Parkour, an expressive form of movement, with the idea being to get from one point to another in a complex environment without assistive equipment and in the fastest and most efficient way possible. Pioneered in France during the 1990s by David Belle, often regarded as the founder of parkour, David would commit to his training after learning of the hardships his father faced as an orphan in Vietnam, where he trained nightly by running, climbing trees, and using military obstacle courses in secret. With it being such an exciting, fluid way of traversal, it's only natural that it would end up in video games one day or another. While not the first video game to feature this kind of movement, with Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time releasing 5 years prior, and with other games coming out relatively close to Assassin's Creed's release, like Free Running and Mirror's Edge, it's perhaps the first game to offer such freedom to the player with this specific type of movement. While revolutionary and incredibly fun for the time, to be able to maneuver your way steadily across rooftops, scale almost everything you could see, and take the occasional accidental plummet, even by 2007 standards, the controls had a knack to feel slightly on the clunky side, with Altair occasionally feeling heavy at the most inopportune moments, making scaling certain objects feel slow and tedious, while at the same time trying to avoid incoming rocks being launched at you. Occasionally, you'll press an input, and Altair will decide he's had enough of all this assassination malarkey, and throw himself in the opposite direction from where you were aiming to go, often resulting in an untimely death after meeting the Earth at the speed of terminal velocity. But for 2007, and even now, when it all works out how you'd expect it to, it's undeniably a fun time. With the heart of Assassin's Creed's gameplay taking place within the animus, occasionally you'll be ripped out of the immersion to be subjected to some rather dull exposition, with the typical villain trope of, for some reason, the villain disclosing to you all of his intentions, or sometimes being told to just go take a nap. The parts outside of the animus have a tedious way of breaking the flow of gameplay more than anything, with them serving as nothing more than an interactive cutscene, rather boring ones at that. With that being said, the core gameplay loop of Assassin's Creed sits on the side of being repetitive, with little changing the further you progress. Make your way to the city where the intended target is located, conduct an investigation, which more or less revolves around you completing the same things over and over again, eavesdropping on people with valuable information, pickpocketing people with valuable information, or beating people with valuable information, with all of that culminating with you having enough information to conduct your assassination. The excitement does have a tendency to wear off after you've taken out a few of the targets, with the story doing little to keep you entertained, but the base idea of an enjoyable time is there. It's more or less the same story when it comes to the combat. The hidden blade being an assassin's best friend, allowing for them to stealthily kill a target without a single soul noticing, or to pounce from above in an epic moment of bloodletting from the subject's neck for the whole crowd to see. If not having a hidden blade is enough to satisfy your needs, the more loud and proud direct approach to combat has the potential to satisfy your power fantasy needs, but perhaps to a fault. You can flail at an enemy until their guard breaks, plunge a throwing knife into their chest from a distance, or perhaps do what is undeniably the cooler approach. Counter any incoming attacks to leave the poor victim of your blade open to a rather brutal end, while entertaining to watch and satisfying that feeling of being unstoppable. That's where the problem may lie. Where's the enjoyment or sense of reward to just pressing a button to insta-kill a target? Tedious after a while, of course, but it's still a visceral feeling to take out a large group of enemies without taking as much as a scratch in the process. While the cities rather impressively feel inhabited and larger than they truly are, they're connected via an unfortunate barren hub named the Kingdom. While the cities have a lot going for them, the Kingdom feels like nothing more than an empty time padder with little of particular interest to see or do. Disguised as a traversal link between cities, it contradicts the rest of the game, with rooftop scaling and alleyway traversing swapped for riding for minutes on end, occasionally maneuvering away from enemies, and checking the map to make sure you're heading in the right direction. Perhaps one of the most iconic things about Assassin's Creed, apart from the obvious assassinations, is a feature which has since found itself interwoven into most of Ubisoft's open world titles: the synchronization tower, a specific place, usually located at the top of a tall structure, which allows for you to learn about specific points of interest in your surrounding area. a feature which is necessary to follow in order to conduct your investigations around the cities. But what is perhaps more iconic than the actual towers themselves is the ability to dive from these great heights and survive, by defying the laws of physics and safely landing in a hay bale a few hundred feet below without ending up in a mangled or paralysed splatter on the floor. Of course, it doesn't always go that way, with the game occasionally having a tendency to just ignore the safe landing below and launch you off in an opposite direction, where you definitely won't survive the fall. While not the first game to feature a third-person parkour style of movement, Assassin's Creed did help to increase its popularity, perhaps more than any game that came before it. After Assassin's Creed, other games would also do the same. From espionage and the slaying of fascists in the Saboteur, to orc slaying and tower climbing in the recent Middle-earth games, to Lara Croft's raiding of tombs and survival in the Tomb Raider reboot, to Aloy fighting against man and machine in Horizon Zero Dawn. Nowadays, it's become increasingly commonplace to see this method of movement in third-person games. Clunky and sharp around the edges, Assassin's Creed allows for a unique perspective into the medieval crusades and the unfortunate plight that the people of the time suffered through. Based on a real-life historical event, with the inclusion of a fictional guild of assassins who may or may not have actually existed, according to certain documents. Assassin's Creed offers the ability to explore and immerse yourself in a setting which was rarely covered before or since the release of the game, while giving you the ability to have a lot of enjoyment while doing it. After all, what other game lets you explore such a setting in the way Assassin's Creed does?